On September 28, 1979, three individuals anonymously contacted the editor of a local newspaper, informing them that while they had been strolling through campground in South Lake Tahoe, California, they had stumbled upon the lifeless body of a woman. Upon receiving the anonymous information, the editor promptly notified the sheriff's deputies, informing them about a potential discovery of a woman's body at Sugar Pine Point State Park. Subsequently, the police responded to the call and located the deceased woman's body in a picnic area situated on the west shore of Lake Tahoe. The victim had been sexually assaulted, beaten, and strangled to death. Based on the evidence at the crime scene, police determined that the woman was likely chased through the picnic area, leaving behind one of her flip-flops in the process. The police believe the woman fought her attacker fiercely throughout the park while trying to run away. Police were unable to identify the body, as she did not have any sort of ID on her. Detectives determined that she had been traveling alone. In a sad turn of events, investigators believed the woman may have actually been alive when the three people found her. However, the lack of movement and the gruesomeness of the body's presentation may have hid such information. Investigators gathered vital evidence from the crime scene, including DNA samples retrieved from a beer bottle discovered near the woman's body, as well as DNA found on the victim herself. The police located and questioned the individuals who originally discovered the body, inquiring about their reasons for not directly reporting it to authorities. The three individuals told police they had warrants out for their arrest and did not want to get involved. Police investigated these individuals, but they were eventually cleared. Despite the detectives' extensive efforts, they were unable to determine the woman's identity. They shared a sketch of the victim with local media, but did not achieve any success. The authorities believe that the woman was approximately between the ages of 35 and 45, with the height ranging from 5'2" to 5'4", and the weight of approximately 115 to 130 pounds at the time of the murder. She was dressed in a lavender t-shirt, Levi bell-bottom jeans, and leather sandals, with a leather strap across the arch. Additionally, she wore a gold wedding band, engraved with the inscription, quote, "To Mac from P&B," along with two other rings, as well as a necklace featuring a pendant resembling a deer. Following various leads, the detectives pursued allegations that the deceased woman had previously resided in a motel in South Lake Tahoe and had recently won a substantial amount of money playing Keno in the casinos before her murder. In their investigation, detectives thoroughly examined significant prize winners at various local casinos, but they were unable to uncover any valuable leads as to the woman's identity. The woman was buried in the Tahoma Cemetery in a nondescript grave marked, quote, "Unknown female." The woman remained unidentified for more than 35 years. Then in 2014, the case was reassigned to investigator John Gaines, who had recently joined El Dorado County's Cold Case Homicide Unit. This specialized unit was responsible for reevaluating unsolved homicides from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Gaines discovered that the woman's body had been buried, along with her jewelry. Consequently, he issued an order to exhume the unidentified body and published photographs of the jewelry in hopes that someone would recognize it. Gaines observed that the necklace worn by the woman had initially been misidentified as being that of a deer. However, upon closer inspection, he realized that it was actually a chai pendant, which is widely recognized as a symbol of Jewish origin, representing life. Photos were published in the newspapers across the country, and in 2015, a significant breakthrough occurred when a 61-year-old woman reached out to the police. She informed them that her missing mother had worn a pendant resembling the one depicted in the photos. The woman provided a DNA sample and finally, the unidentified body was given a name, Patricia Carnahan. It was found that in 1979, Patricia, 35 years old at the time, had been on a solo road trip around California in her red Volkswagen microbus. She had told her family that she was on her way home, but she never arrived. Her family reported her missing after she failed to return home or contact them. Her van was later found abandoned at a car dealership in Venice, California. At that time, police were unable to establish the connection between the van and the unidentified woman, as her body was discovered, APPROXIMATEL, at a campground in South Lake Tahoe. The circumstances surrounding how Patricia's van ended up so far from her body remain unclear, even though the victim was finally identified. After 35 years, her killer was still at large. Investigators then compared the DNA found on the beer bottle and the DNA found on Patricia's body. They confirmed that the two samples were a match, enabling them to establish a DNA profile. For further analysis, the DNA profile was tested against the 3 individuals who originally found Patricia's body in 1979. However, it did not yield a match with any of them. The DNA profile was later entered into CADIS, but no matches could be found at that time. But in February of 2023, a match was finally made. As part of a nationwide effort to eliminate the backlog of untested SACs, assault kits, authorities in Washington state tested an SAC collected in 1994 from a case in Spokane, Washington. Once the DNA kit was finally tested, it was entered into CADIS. The DNA tested was over 20 years old. However, once the DNA was run through the system, a positive match was made. The previous DNA submitted to CADIS from the information built off the DNA found on Patricia's body matched that of one Harold Carpenter. In 1994, Carpenter was accused by a homeless woman of sexually assaulting her in Spokane. Healthcare workers gathered evidence through an SAC. Carpenter claimed that the sexual encounter was consensual, while also accusing the woman of stealing his wallet. He was arrested, but released 1 day later after the case was deemed, quote, unprovable. The female victim from the 1994 case has since passed away. Between 1994 and its testing in 2023, the SAC was placed in a storage shelf, untested for decades. It was found that Carpenter was arrested in Susanville, California on September 29, 1979, 1 day after Patricia's murder, on charges of driving under the influence. He was subsequently sent to Bonneville County Sheriff's Office in Idaho, where he was wanted for a burglary. In the following decades, Harold Carpenter acquired several more misdemeanor arrests and convictions in both the states of Idaho and Washington. These charges included possession of drugs, disturbing the peace, reckless driving, and driving under the influence. In 2016, Carpenter was homeless in Spokane, Washington. Later, he would relocate to the Park Tower Apartments, a housing facility designated for low-income, elderly, and disabled individuals. In 2018, Carpenter had become a suspect in another sexual assault case, also in Spokane, Washington. Additionally, in the previous year, he had been linked to an incident involving unwanted, inappropriate touching. However, he was never arrested in relation to either of those cases. Carpenter was never suspected of Patricia's murder, although he cannot be charged for the 1994 Spokane case, as the statute of limitations for that case has passed, and the victim has died. He, however, was arrested for Patricia Carnahan's murder in February of 2023. He is currently being held without bond in Spokane, Washington, as the extradition process continues. The case will go to trial, But for now, detectives can rest, knowing that the case was solved after 44 years. In 1992, Nikki Allan, 7 years old, lived with her 26-year-old single mother and her 3 sisters, living in a small ground floor flat in Sunderland, Tyne-and-Wear, England. The block of flats which they occupied was known as the Ware Garths block. It overlooked the docks of Sunderland in the East End. These apartments were often referred to as the Garths, and they housed approximately 1,000 people. This area of low-income housing was known for being tightly knit and full of mostly working-class people. Despite living in an area plagued by poverty and criminal activities, the bonds within the locality were strong. Nikki was an endearing young girl, described as vibrant and full of life. Nikki loved exploring and visiting various places, such as carnivals or anywhere her school would take her. She relished the company of her friends and her cousins and loved playing with her toys. Her family remembers that her favorite snack was cheese and onion-flavored crisps. Despite the family's financial constraints, Nikki's mother, Sharon, loved her kids immensely and continuously ensured her children had food in their stomachs and clean clothes to wear. Sharon's parents also lived in the Garths. They were close with their daughter and would often help Sharon take care of her kids. On October 7, 1992, Sharon attended to her daily household chores while she was doing laundry in her twin tub machine. Her youngest daughter peacefully slept, while her older 2, Stacy and Nikki, watched television. At some point during the evening, Sharon went to her parents' flat in order to get some painkillers for a headache, which had been caused from the noise of the washing machine. Her parents' flat was only about 150 yards from her own. Her 7-year-old, Nikki, decided to tag along with her mother. At around 8:30 p.m., Nikki would leave her grandparents' house alone. The exact timing of her departure is unclear. As her mother, Sharon, says, it was 8:30 p.m., while some witnesses and the police recall it being closer to 10 p.m. Nonetheless, Sharon recalls that 10 minutes after Nikki left, she would also leave her parents' house. She walked the 150 yards back to her apartment, through the stairwell and a short corridor, eventually reaching what would be an alarming scene. Upon entering, she would learn that her 7-year-old daughter, Nikki, never returned. Sharon reported Nikki missing to the police. Within the hour, police arrived and launched a search for the missing girl. As the community was tight-knit, word got around of Nikki's disappearance. As a result, over 100 dedicated volunteers came together and commenced a thorough search effort, going door to door, checking parks, playgrounds, alleyways, industrial units, and the riverbank. The next morning, a group of searchers consisting of Nikki's own family, including her aunt, came across a pair of shoes alongside a coat that she was wearing when she disappeared. These 2 items had appeared outside of the derelict and long-abandoned Quayside Exchange building. Inside the abandoned Exchange building, the search group found the lifeless body of Nikki. She was lying in a pool of blood. An autopsy revealed that Nikki had been beaten over the head with a brick and had been stabbed 37 times in the chest and abdomen. The autopsy report says that she was dragged by her ankles from her room, where the attack initially happened, down into the basement where she was eventually found. Although there were no signs of a sexual assault, police do believe the attack started off with a separate motive, and investigators say that the killer, for some reason, later changed his mind. The discovery of such a tragedy brought forth a wave of shock, horror, and anger into a community that used to be peaceful. The gruesomeness of the crime scene and the age of the victim placed immediate pressure on police to find the person responsible for the crime. Detectives started their investigation by going door to door, questioning anybody who may have seen anything. A few witnesses came forward who claimed to have seen the young girl on the night of the murder. Some had said that they had seen Nikki around 10 p.m. begging for money outside of the local Boar's Head pub. Some recall that she had been begging for money to go to the sweet shop down the road, while another witness said that she was asking for a penny for the guy, a tradition amongst British children, in which they collect money to buy fireworks for Guy Fawkes Night. Another witness, Margaret Hodgson, recalls that around 10 p.m. she was waiting to collect her mother from her shift at the fish factory. During this time, she recalled that she witnessed a young girl skipping to keep up with a man on Low Street. As they made their way towards the Exchange building, Margaret thought that they were father and daughter, an assumption which she says will tragically live in her mind until the day she dies. Around the same time that Margaret Hodgson witnessed what police believed to be was Nikki following an adult man down a street. Patricia Irwin happened to also be walking past the abandoned Exchange building. She says that while she was walking, she discerned the sound of wood breaking, accompanied by what seemed to be the distressed cries of a cat. In retrospect, she says, she was horrified when she realized the true origins of those sounds. Another witness, Carol Osborne, says that she was in her nearby flat and became startled by two loud screams, which reverberated through the area. She says that she vehemently believes the screams were that of a child. Shortly after, police released video footage of a man, followed by a child, walking towards the old Exchange building. The footage is of low quality, and it is difficult to identify the man or the child. But detectives do believe that this was the last sighting of Nikki alive. A few days later, a man called police and told them that a 14-year-old girl had approached him and had reported that a man, soaked in blood, had gone up to her on the night of the murder and had confessed to killing somebody. The call was made anonymously, and while police used the media to appeal to the man or the girl in order for them to come forward, they never did, and nothing came of the tip. During their inquiries, one name always seemed to come back up: George Huron. At the time, George Huron was 24 years old, living with his sister also in the Garths. Despite moving to the area with his sister just a few weeks prior, many people claim that he frequently was visiting the Quayside Exchange building where Nikki's body was found. Several witnesses specifically place him at the Boar's Head pub on the night of the murder. Additionally, a few remember that he was buying cheese and onion-flavored crisps, which were Nikki's favorite. Moreover, when questioned by police, George's sister stated that he had been acting strange the night of the murder. She recalls that upon returning home, George went straight to the bathroom and would spend the next half hour washing both his clothes and himself. His sister said this was very unusual for him. Detectives conducted a search of his home and found clothing and shoes stained with blood. Additionally, detectives found a knife, which they believed to be the same weapon used in Nikki's murder, or at the very least, they believed it was capable of inflicting wounds consistent with those found on her body. George was brought in for questioning, and while he initially denied knowing Nikki, he later admitted to having an acquaintance with her. After witnesses came forward to say that they had seen him with Nikki on several occasions, George also flatly denied going out on the night of the murder, despite several witnesses claiming they'd seen him at the Boar's Head pub, and despite the fact that his sister confirmed his absence. While George categorically denied murdering Nikki on at least 120 separate occasions during his questioning, after 3 days of intense interrogation, George confessed to murdering Nikki. He was charged with Nikki's murder and was put on trial. George's trial was transferred to Leeds in fear that the community's hatred towards him would make it difficult to guarantee a fair trial. In Sunderland, in fact, during his first appearance in the magistrate court, one man tried to attack George, but was restrained by police officers. The crowd expressed their anger by shouting threats and vigorously banging upon the police van in which he was being transported. While George was in prison on remand, he was attacked by another inmate, resulting in a severe laceration across his face. George's trial commenced in Leeds Crown Court in October of 1993. Nikki's family, along with relatives and numerous members of the local community, made daily trips to attend the court proceedings. On many occasions, they had to be restrained from attempting to leap onto the dock to confront and attack George. Even though the evidence against George was circumstantial, police and prosecutors were confident that a conviction based on George's confession would happen. The prosecutors alleged that George took the girl to the exchange building. However, they postulate that when she started to scream, George tried to silence her by hitting her in the head with the brick. While Nikki fell to the ground, they said that George would again hit her with the brick as she lay. Detectives go on to say that most likely, George took a knife and then mercilessly stabbed her in the chest, inflicting 37 stab wounds. However, upon reviewing the case, the judge criticized police for their handling of both the case itself and the suspect. He ruled that 7 of the 12 interview tapes, considered pivotal by the Crown Prosecution Service and substantiating his guilt, were deemed inadmissible. The judge then declared that police had distorted the evidence. During their interviews with George, the judge questioned why only a legal executive, not a qualified solicitor, had been present for the first 6 hours of the interview. He said that police neglected their legal obligation to inform individuals being interviewed under caution about the right to have a qualified solicitor present. During the process, he also criticized the police for using oppressive methods in order to get a confession. Moreover, the judge noted that the prosecution cited 2 different witnesses, both who provided 2 different descriptions of a man seen at the pub, and the judge said that there were notable discrepancies between their accounts. He continued that neither witness was actually able to identify George from a police lineup. The witnesses later testified that they were pressured by police to get a result. For example, Darren Baker, boyfriend of George's sister, initially stated in court that George was missing for an hour on the night of the murder, but he later confessed that his previous statement had been false. He said that George had been with the family, watching TV on the night of the murder, but that police had arrested him as well, under the suspicion of assisting an offender, and he himself had spent 5 days in prison. He then said that he told them what they wanted to hear in exchange for his freedom. After 6 weeks of deliberation, the judge acquitted George Heron of Nikki's murder. An uproar erupted in court, with Nikki's mother collapsing and her family members shouting profanities and anger. Fearing George's safety, the judge moved him out of Sunderland and gave him a new identity. In 1994, Sharon sued George, seeking damages for battery of Nikki, resulting in her death. Heron did not contest the case. She won the case and was awarded €7,000. However, she never received the money, as George could not be found, owing to the fact that the government had issued him a new identity. In subsequent years, Sharon faced immense challenges in coping with her everyday life. Without Nikki, false rumors were started that Sharon had neglected her children and that she was a, quote, good time girl who cared more about parties than parenting. Such accusations were not only false, but incredibly painful to a mother in mourning. Eventually, the rumors were proved groundless, but it took a heavy toll on Sharon and added to her already unbearable pain. In an effort to restore some sense of normalcy, she would go on to remarry. However, the marriage struggled under the weight of her grief, and she would eventually get divorced. In a later interview, she said, quote, "The only point to my life became looking after my other barons and trying to get justice for Nikki, but I could not see how." Over the years, police had several suspects, including Stephen Grievetson, also known as the Sunderland Strangler. He was interviewed as he was currently serving 3 life sentences for the murder of 3 boys, but he was never charged in 2017. Police reopened the case on Sharon's request and attempted to use advancements in DNA technology in order to find the killer responsible. Police were able to retrieve DNA from Nikki's clothes and were able to create a DNA profile. In 2018, a mass DNA screening of people in the area led them to link 54-year-old David Thomas Boyd to the murder. Police charged to David Boyd with Nikki's murder in 2022. Police say that at the time of Nikki's death in 1992, Boyd was 25 years old and had resided merely 3 doors down from Nikki's grandparents. Notably, his girlfriend at the time happened to be Nikki's babysitter. It was found that Boyd had an extensive criminal record. In 1986, he was convicted for breach of peace after he approached 4 children, grabbing one and asking them for a kiss. In 1999, he was convicted of indecently assaulting a female under the age of 14. After the conviction, he told his probation officer that he often had fantasies about young girls. During the trial, prosecutors said, quote, "Boyd forced Nikki through the 6-foot, boarded-up window of the derelict building. It was the only point of access to that building, and this man plainly knew that building well and knew exactly where and how to get into it. A few days before the murder, he had reportedly taken a 12-year-old boy there, utilizing the same window as an entrance in order to look at what he says were pigeons." Detectives detail that once he got inside the building, he would go on to crush her school with the brick, pulling up her top and exposing her chest, going on to stab her again and again. Police say he then dragged her down into the cellar. While Boyd denied murdering Nikki, he refused to go into the witness box in order to give evidence. He claimed that his DNA may have ended up on Nikki when he spat from his flat's balcony while the girl was playing below. However, the prosecution cast doubt on this argument. They highlighted that none of David's DNA was discovered on Nikki's coat, but chases were found on her cycling shorts and her t-shirt. The prosecutor said, quote, "is the clothing that her killer would have inevitably had to handle when forcing her into the building, picking her up inside and manhandling her." Boyd was never suspect in the original case, even though he had a criminal record. It is believed that he evaded suspicion due to the fact that police were firmly convinced George Huron was the killer. In fact, Boyd took advantage of the 1992 police confusion. In order to craft a false alibi, he even provided a statement at George's trial on May 12, 2023. David Boyd was finally found guilty of the murder of Nikki Allan. It took the jury of 10 women and 2 men just 2.5 hours of deliberating to convict him. David's due to be sentenced on May 23, 2023. The senior investigating officer in the case added, quote, "Nikki would have been 37 now, and who knows what her life could have been. But her future was cruelly taken away by David Boyd. The pain and suffering that he has caused, and just so many people, is immeasurable. This is a huge day for Nikki's family. I would like to thank them for their incredible strength. After 30 years, they have justice,